A drum gaily tapped out the cadence. "Fine. Cheerful does it, lads," said Kazire approvingly. And the whip cracked and whistled its melody over the snowbound Ukrainian fields. As they passed through Belaya, the mist was clearing, the roads were black with troops and the snow crunching under the weight of marching feet. At the crossroads in Belaya, the cavalry column halted to let pass a 1,500-strong body of infantry. The men in the leading ranks all wore identical blue long-skirted tunics of good quality German cloth. They were thin-laced, wiry, active little men who carried their weapons like trained troops, Galicians. In the rear ranks came men dressed in long heel-length hospital robes, belted in with yellow rawhide straps. On their heads, bouncing atop their fur caps, were battered German army helmets, and their hobnailed boots pounded the snow beneath them. The white roads leading to the city were beginning to blacken with advancing troops. "Hurrah!" the passing infantry shouted in salute to the yellow and blue ensign. "Hurrah!" echoed the woods and fields of Belaya. The cry was taken up by the guns to the rear and on the left of the marching column. Under cover of night, the commander of the support troops, Colonel Toropitz, had already moved 2 batteries into the forest around the city. The guns were positioned in a half-circle amid the sea of snow and had started a bombardment at dawn. The 6-inch guns shook the snow-capped pine trees with waves of thundering explosions. A couple of rounds fell short in the large village of Pushta-Voditsa, shattering all the windows of 4 snowbound houses. Several pine trees were reduced to splinters and the explosions threw up enormous fountains of snow. Then all sound died in the village. The forest reverted to its dreamy silence and only the frightened squirrels were left scuttling, with a rustle of paws, between the trunks of centuries-old trees. After that, the 2 batteries were withdrawn from Pushcha and switched to the right flank. They crossed boundless acres of arable land, through the wood-girt village of Urachish, wheeled onto a narrow country road, drove onto a fork in the road, and there they deployed in sight of the city. From early in the morning, a high-bursting shrapnel bombardment began to fall on Podgorodnya, Savskaya and on Korenyovka, a suburb of the city itself. In the overcast, snow-laden sky, the shrapnel bursts made a rattling noise, as though someone were playing a game of dice. The inhabitants of these villages had taken cover in their cellars since daybreak, and by the early morning half-light thin lines of cadets, frozen to the bone, could be seen conducting a skirmishing withdrawal towards the heart of the city. Before long, however, the artillery stopped and gave way to the cheerful rattle of machine gun fire somewhere on the northern outskirts of the city. Then it too died down. The train carrying the headquarters of Colonel Toropets, commander of the support troops, stood deep in the vast forest at the junction about 5 miles from the village of Sviatoshino, lifeless, snowbound and deafened by the crash and thunder of gunfire. All night the electric light had burned in the train's 6 cars, all night the telephone had rung in the signal box and the field telephone squealed in Colonel Toropet's grimy compartment. As the glimmer of a snowy morning began to light up the surroundings, the guns were already thundering ahead up the line leading from Sviatoshino to Post Volensk. The bird-like calls of field telephones in their yellow wooden boxes were growing more urgent, and Colonel Toropets, a thin, nervous man, said to his executive officer Kudiakovsky, "We've captured Sviatoshino. Find out please, whether we can move the train up to Sviatoshino." Toropet's train moved slowly forward between the timber walls of the wintry forest and halted near the intersection of the railroad and a great highroad which thrust its way like an arrow to the very heart of the city. Here, in the dining car, Colonel Toropets started to put into operation the plan which he had worked out for 2 sleepless nights in that same bug-ridden dining car No. 4173. The city rose up in the mist, surrounded on all sides by a ring of advancing troops. From the forests and farmland in the north, from the captured village of Sviatoshino in the west, from the ill-fated Post Volensk in the southwest, through the woods, the cemeteries, the open fields and the disused shooting ranges ringed by the railroad line, the black lines of cavalry trotted and jingled inexorably forward along paths and tracks or simply cut across country, whilst the lumbering artillery creaked along behind and the ragged infantry of Petliura's army trudged through the snow to tighten the noose that they had been drawing around the city for the past month. The field telephones shrilled ceaselessly in the saloon car, its carpeted floor trodden and crumpled, until Franco and Garras, the two signalmen, began to go mad. Toropet's plan was a cunning one, as cunning as the tense, black-browed, clean-shaven colonel himself. He had intentionally sighted his two batteries behind the forest, intentionally blown up the streetcar lines in the shabby little village of Pushta Voditsa. He had then purposely moved his machine guns away from the farmlands, deploying them towards the left flank. For Toropets wanted to fool the defenders of the city into thinking that he, Toropets, intended to assault the city from his left, the northern, flank, from the suburb of Kurenyovka, in order to draw the city's forces in that direction, whilst the real attack on the city would be delivered frontally, straight along the Brest-Litovsk highway from Svyatashino, timed to coincide with a simultaneous assault from the south, on his right flank, from the direction of the village of Dmiovka. So, in accordance with Toropet's plan, Petliura's regiments were moving across from the left to the right flank, and to the sound of cracking whips and accordion music, with a sergeant at the head of each troop marched the 4 squadrons of Kazir Leshko's regiment of horse. Hurrah! Echoed the woods around Belaya High, hurrah! Leaving Belaya High, they crossed the railroad line by a wooden bridge, and from there they caught their first glimpse of the city. It lay in the distance, still warm from sleep, wrapped in a vapor that was half mist, half smoke. Rising in his stirrups, Kazir stared through his ice-field glasses at the innumerable roofs of many-story houses and the domes of the ancient cathedral of St. Sophia. Fighting was already in progress on Kazir's right. From a mile or so away came the boom of gunfire and the stutter of machine guns. Waves of Petliura's infantry were advancing on Post-Volensk as the noticeably thinner and more ragged lines of the motley White Guard infantry, shattered by the heavy enemy fire, were retreating from the village. The city. A heavy, lowering sky. A street corner. A few suburban bungalows, a scattering of army greatcoats. I've just heard, people are saying they've made an agreement with Petliura to allow all Russian manned units to keep their arms and to go and join Denikin on the Don. Well? So what? A rumbling burst of gunfire. Then a machine gun started to bark. A cadet's voice, full of bewilderment and despair. But then that means we must cease resistance, doesn't it? Wearily, another cadet's voice. God alone knows.